And my problem is that painterliness does not equal emotion.
Okay. What do you mean?
This is a modernist problem. It's like, what constitutes a painting? Some schools of thinking is like something that is sloppy and painterly. That is, it shows the evidence of it being like put down like butter on bread. For example, Rembrandt is the epitome of a painter's painter because he is so rich in the way he handles material. Okay, but I would contend that no, an Indian miniature is great painting, and that deserves as much attention as a Rembrandt. Or a Persian miniature is a great painting. But these are categories of painting that are predicated on the Oriental tradition of thin application and linearity and chromatic complexity. You see? So rich colors and this weird otherworldliness that is conveyed by the use of this gouache medium that like you can't get through oil paint. So that goes back to what I was saying. It's like each material used has its innate capacity to imprint itself in the heart, to have an affective impact that is particular to that medium of expression.
I'm publishing this podcast in partnership with the Orthodox Arts Journal and New World Byzantine. The Orthodox Arts Journal is an online resource where you can find articles about Orthodox iconography, architecture, and music from some of the foremost pioneers in the field, such as Aidan Hart, Vladimir Morrison, and Jonathan Pajot. New World Byzantine is the architectural design firm run by Andrew Gould, who in my estimation is the foremost Orthodox architectural designer in North and South America, bringing together a marriage of American design and traditional Orthodox building arts.
Well, so what I was thinking about that is you have this awesome integration of, you know, you look at the colorists, you can appreciate something from Rothko. You know, I'm not gonna lie. If I see Rothko, I have the tendency of thinking I could do that, and maybe I couldn't do that. You know, it's like,
No,
but when it's just one paint, like one color of paint on a canvas, it's like, okay, my daughter could do that. I just say, hey, here's this color of paint. Go paint this.
You know what? You gotta. Have you seen a Rothko in real life?
I have.
Okay, all right. So I don't know. I mean, listen. Rothko is like a symphony, man. Rothko is like it's a facile analogy because it's like the want to go, the easy to go analogy when it comes to abstract works and to understand what's going on, but like the musical analogy. But it's like in a musical piece. I don't know, there isn't necessarily any kind of narrative that like. I say not necessarily because perhaps the composer had, and you tell me if I'm wrong, they might have had, like, for example, some of them did thematic compositions, like the seasons or whatever. So perhaps in their mind, they had a narrative of how a season unfolds that they're trying to capture in the music. And so when you listen to it, perhaps you're visualizing in your mind what you have experienced in nature and how that music resonates with that experience. I can understand that. But in most cases, I mean, music is not predicated on what you could decipher and articulate verbally. It's an experience that is an immediate immersion in feeling. And so
it's not necessarily programmatic.
Yeah, it's not programmatic
It
necessarily.
stands on its own.
It stands on its own. It's temporal as compared to an object like a painting that is just
instead of like
given to you at
spatial,
once.
it's
Yeah, exactly.
temporal. Yeah.
Exactly. It unfolds through time. So, but nevertheless, in a work like a Rothko or a non-objective work, you're dealing with form in a way that you're dealing with. That's why Kandinsky called it composition, because he was using music as an analogy to what he was doing with form and color, and it's how these things affect us in a visceral, perceptual, cognitive, and emotive level. Now,
I will say I love some Kandinsky. I don't know why I love Kandinsky, but if I'm somewhere and they have Kandinsky, I'm going to find the Kandinsky.
I was, what got me into abstraction initially was Kandinsky, to tell you the truth. Yeah. But we got sidetracked. But what you were saying about, I interrupted you. What were you saying about like well,
I wonder if I really don't know how much skill there is. And I think part of how people assess if something is beautiful or not is if they see that there's not really any skill to it, then they assume that it's not beautiful.
That's very
so I really don't. I mean, is there a ton of skill to Rothko, or is it just like for what it is, it's awesome? Is it like the conception of it that's amazing, more so than like the skill of the execution?
It's all of it put together.
Yeah.
When you try to do an abstract painting, you realize that is extremely difficult. If you try to do a Jackson Pollock, which is the usual joke, I could splatter paint like that. You cannot get the rhythmic beauty that you get in a Pollock from just doing your own splatter, nonsense. It's just you have to be who he is. I mean, that's not going to happen. I mean, and so he arrived at, after many years of articulating or grappling with what he could make a painting become based on his studies of the figure, and then also landscape, and his problem with psychology, because the problem with a lot of the abstract expressionists were dealing with surrealism and automatism and which was drawing and painting as a means by which you open up aspects of your psyche, and then the work becomes a manifestation of the unconscious. And so he was working from that tradition, but it became something unique that was unprecedented. But in any case, so you have to look when you look at a painting like that, it requires, for example, for me to learn the complexities of a Bach, it's like I'm missing 90%, comparatively speaking, from what you experience when you listen to it, because you are entering into it not only in terms of the skill that it took to compose that, you're looking at it from the historical context from which Bach came and how that plugs into the development of music, the biography of Bach himself, and the particular performance of the people who are using his sheet music to translate what he's doing at that given performance. You know what I'm saying? It's a multi-layered, assimilation. And so the same thing is required of looking at a Barnett Newman, a Pollock, Jackson, a Rothko. And if you're not plugged into the tradition and you don't know where it fits into the trajectory of painting, you're just going to dismiss it as just an idiosyncratic BS, because it's just, and if you do not know what color is all about, if you don't know how the subtlety of paint alters your feeling, then you're not going to know the difference between how Rothko like almost like breathe that color in, because it's like a smoky kind of thing, compared to the energy of and the gravity manifestation of a Pollock hitting the surface. So I mean, they're two different worlds, and so you are feeling that as you are experiencing it. And so one of the things that I learned from very early that I think people have to learn is to not see a work expecting to derive a deductive reasoning effect out of it, or a narrative content out of it. To look at it purely for the form and what the form is doing in that flat surface, how the space is constructed, how the implied environment of those forms lead you into imagining your body within that space, how the energy or not energy, or the geometry, or the painterliness, or whatever or the linearity of it, the lyricism, or the robustness, whatever it might be, how these pictorial events are manifesting in front of you, and to react to them according to their formal qualities and not according to an imposed expectation of narrative or deductive, instrumentalized kind of expectations. Because
sure,
you know what I'm saying? Because often, and this is my frustration with some of the culture war components between traditional art forms, liturgical art forms, the calling back towards beauty and tradition, and the rejection of like modernism and stuff like that. It's like a lot of it to me fails insofar as people want something that is already instrumentalized. Okay, while they give lip service and they say we don't want propaganda, they end up creating a vehicle, a cultural form that is, by definition, imbued with the content in it, which serves as an instrument for their worldview. So it's already a form of propaganda. It's not the crass kind of like Nazi or communist social realistic propaganda, obviously. But it serves as an ideological platform for what it is they want to present as an alternative to the modernist paradigm. So in that sense, you could say it has some degree of propagandist value. Okay? Now,
is propaganda of necessity bad?
Not necessarily.
There was a guy named a famous pianist, Neuhaus, and he said the principal aim of the pianist is propaganda.
Well,
I thought that's an interesting.
It's an interesting way of putting it, because it actually brings into the discussion the fact that we call propaganda the easily assimilable ideological the communication of ideological perspective or platform through in the case I'm thinking about visual form, or you could use music, right? So usually is bad art insofar as it's kitsch, insofar as it's easily assimilable, because it plays into what most people expect as to be gratified as, I'm not challenged. It's okay, that's a hero and he represents my country, and so he's a good guy by definition, so I'm on his side, and so it's flat in that sense. It's just that easily transactional. So we're fine if it is the ideological platform that we advance. But if it becomes something that is what we're against, that's when we call it propaganda. Not what is. You know what I'm saying? No, when
Yeah,
it's our
if it's
own,
not just easily assimilable, then is it propaganda?
it could
Like,
be.
is that the main thing that makes it?
No,
Because there
no,
also
I'm
seems
thinking
to be
it.
something about like the telos of it is more for the ideology than it is for like the beauty of the thing
It's
or
more for
something
the
like that.
ideology, but a lot of propaganda in the classic sense of like 20th century, like World War II, kind of like examples. It's also it uses some degree of beauty, kitschy
Hmm.
beauty, as a way of like reaching the masses more readily.
Yeah.
You see, however, the conversely, you could say the same thing happens with, for example, like crazy woke agenda propaganda in museums nowadays. So is avant-garde art ultimately used as political propaganda? So
Yeah,
so
that's like
so you see what I'm
why
saying?
Camille Paglia said the avant-garde is dead.
Right.
You know,
Yeah.
it's been dead since Warhol, I think she
Right,
said.
right, yeah. So anyways, so it's a complicated issue, but what I'm saying is that we have to be careful with the problem of I forgot the initial thought that we
Well, it was
that
going from
got us.
Rothko. I was saying initially I was not a big fan of Rothko.
Oh,
I was actually
the
trying,
skill proponent.
but the idea of
A
skill, how
skill.
much of that is tied into it?
Yes, yes, yeah.
Yeah.
I think like I was saying is that skill is not a guarantee of legitimate exemplifications of beauty, and seemingly
Okay.
lack of skill could be extremely beautiful.
Sure.
So
Yeah.
I mean,
Well,
that's one of the
why?
yeah,
Yeah.
that's one of the things that the people using the academic model then would deride the icon because it wasn't naturalistic enough, and it was faulty because it did not reach the standards of skill in representing things as they really are.
Right. That makes sense.
So it's like the categories. If you start to push a little bit, they begin to get wobbly.
Yeah. Which, speaking of the categories and the propaganda category, because this was one of my questions, was what makes something excellent Christian art and what makes it Christian propaganda? Because we all know those stupid Christian movies that I just can't stand.
Yeah, yeah,
It's like I I think Godfather 2 is the best Christian movie ever made.
yeah, yeah. I think
You know what I mean?
yeah,
It's
yeah.
like, to me, that's like a, hey, this is what sin is going to do to you, and it's
Right.
going to leave you alone at the end of your life and destroy your family, and this is like the consequences of greed, you know? Like, to me, that's a Christian film.
Yeah.
But then, it's something that the Hallmark Channel came up with, or like the
It's
Left Behind series or
I
whatever.
think
It's like,
it's
okay, this is propaganda.
because it's like, for example, a very skillful painter, a skillful illustrator, but falls into the problem that we're talking about is Norman Rockwell.
Mm-hmm.
Is Christian art made in the according to the model of Norman Rockwell? Because while Norman Rockwell could capture character and like depict things so skillfully and create great commentaries on like Protestant, or whatever, nominally Christian ideals and values in the United States. The 50s kind of like, uh, pre decadence of the 60s, kind of like, golden age, uh,
Right.
nevertheless, it becomes a lie. That's part of the problem because not everything that is
Mm.
beautiful is truthful, like I said before, because it's just easy assimilation because it is cute or because it is not threatening, because it confirms you in your ideals of a simplistic understanding of human nature, wherein you do not want to acknowledge the ugly side of life, as part of the complexity of being a human being, which goes back to the, Godfather, then then you're creating a distorted notion of reality. And so you're justifying it because it somehow is more pleasant to look at, and you think that it will lead people into behaving better. But maybe not. Maybe you're creating a situation in which you are putting into their minds a misconception of human nature and a falsification of what happens in families and had happened in the 50s, throughout the 50s. You're mythologizing reality, let's put it that way, in the negative sense,
Mm-hmm.
to the point that when people wake up from the dream, then they turn on you, because then they're like, okay, you were basically feeding me all these lies.
There's something that doesn't challenge, it's overly assimilable, and there's something that lies about it.
Yeah.
That's those three things. That's a pretty good, definition for propaganda.
So that could be used by anybody. Those things could be used by anybody. Now, yeah. So,
I guess because then, I guess that would be negative propaganda, because there's also all kinds of ways where you can put forth a vision that's not necessarily propaganda, because any work of art is saying something.
Yes, I agree.
So,
I agree.
I guess that's where the definite,
let me,
where we could turn into the negativity of propaganda.
Yeah, I would say that, for example, the issue of the current revival of icon painting, going back to that whole thing, you could see it as partly serving a purpose that is the clear differentiation of orthodoxy from non-orthodox Christian nominal Christian groups. So in that sense, it serves an ideological purpose. And so for a secular social,
or it could,
right, for a social cultural critic or whatever, they could probably see icon painting as being a form of orthodox propaganda. You know what I'm saying? But we don't think of it in those terms, because we know it's something holy, and it's not meant to be used for manipulation. It's meant to be used to uplift people into the contemplation of divine things. It's not meant to be merely weaponized to manipulate people into submitting to a political agenda. You see, so while it does socially serve an ideological purpose, it is not merely propaganda. Although it could be misinterpreted as merely propagandist. If you, for example, not you, but anybody, for example, would then look at Orthodoxy and say, well, they have this claim of unicity that would deem any other Christian group not to be church, and so therefore they're exclusivists, and so therefore they're ideologues, and they could then interpret Orthodoxy in purely political lens, through a purely political lens, and then the icon is, it looks like it's a propaganda tool. You know what I'm saying? And
that
so
if
you're claiming that then Orthodoxy is a brainwashing system and so on and so forth, but you could do that with any kind of any kind of
almost anything.
Yeah, exactly. Anyways, so
now we got onto Rothko, because I was actually going to ask if the same, because I didn't used to appreciate Rothko. Now I've gained a little bit of an appreciation for it. I still don't understand it. Your explanation helps me understand it a little bit more.
you know what? One last thing about Rothko before you. I don't mean to interrupt, but this will help. Last thing. You ever seen that painting by Caspar David Friedrich?
No.
The Monk by the Sea.
Let me look at it.
Look
Monk
at that
by
painting.
The sea. Caspar David.
Okay, so
interesting.
Okay, so Rothko is capturing levels of the sublime without relying on landscape. You could say that's one way that it has been interpreted, purely through the use of color and form, and so, and it's also an apophatic. Also think of abstraction as a form of apophaticism. Is it taken away for you to enter into an awareness of higher levels of or a deeper sense of the mysterious component of being that could potentially, depending on the painter, lead you into a contemplative state of an aesthetic state of contemplation that also reminds you of the wonder of the divine, the grandeur of the divine. And so
Krug does this a lot too, right? Like he uses like the same sort of abstraction with regards to color.
I'm not a fan of Krug, man. I'm not a fan of Krug. Seraphim Mokiva is gonna kill me. You're talking about the iconography, right?
Yeah. What don't you like about Krug? This is
oh man, come on, man. Where you put
Well, he's dead now, so
well, but I don't want to. God bless him, man.
Yes.
A memory eternal. But the thing is, sometimes his faces look too melancholy for me, man. I think what Seraphim Mokiv is doing with his tradition is great, and that he's able to do faces that don't fall into that problem that sometimes Krug had in his faces. Not all of them. Sometimes he's too rough. I like refined things. That's why I like Bronzino. I like things that are refined, and so sometimes Krug gets a little bit too rough, man. And
what about Krug's color, though?
His color is a little bit too muddy at times. A little bit too muddy. The same thing with Ouspensky, man. It's like sometimes they get a little bit too muddy for my like. But that's just that's taste, man. But that doesn't mean that I don't appreciate their virtuosity as painters. When they're hitting the right chord, they're hitting the right chord. And you and you just have to be like, all right, you've earned the acclaim because you're a good painter. And so, but that doesn't mean that everything that they put down is to be equalized. They sometimes, in my opinion, Krug gets too sloppy. It's just and my problem is that painterliness does not equal emotion.
Okay. What do you mean?
Well, there is a school of thought that like that because this is a modernist problem. It's like what constitutes a painting, and some schools of thinking is like something that is sloppy and painterly, like that is it shows the evidence of it being like put down like butter on bread. You know what I'm saying? It's like like for example, like in that sense, like Rembrandt is the epitome of like of a painter's painter because he is so rich in the way he handles material. Okay, but I would contend that no, an Indian miniature is great painting, and that deserves as much attention as a Rembrandt, or a Persian miniature is a great painting. But these are categories of painting that are predicated on the Oriental tradition of thin application and linearity and chromatic complexity. You see? So rich colors and this weird otherworldliness that is conveyed by the use of this gouache medium that like you can't get through oil paint. So you get that goes back to what I was saying. It's like each material used has its innate capacity to imprint itself in the heart to have an affective impact that is particular to that medium of expression, as what is his name would say. I forgot his name. In any case, so
Kumaraswamy?
No, it's this modernist
Okay.
painter that had this. He called it medium of expression because he focused on the idea that, like, that part of the expressive power of a painting is not just the psychological index of the mark as somehow reflecting the soul of the painter, but the material itself that you're using has its own properties, its own energy that conveys, you know, has an impact on the viewer. And
Hey, are you enjoying this conversation? If so, would you please consider supporting me on Patreon? It really helps make more conversations like this possible, and I will give access to be able to ask me or even some future guests questions, as well as some extended interviews of some of the interviews I do on here. And for the first 20 people who sign up at any financial level, I will send you a free copy of my album, Box Organ Mass. Thank you so much for your support. I really appreciate it.
so, anyway, getting back to what you were saying about the Rothko, I keep on interrupting you, and I apologize about that.
No, no worries. No, originally I was gonna say, like, one of the things that I love about your work is that you've been able to integrate stuff that's clearly not in the liturgical tradition, like Rothko, and like the colorists, into your own work. Like, you've been able to extract, like, the jewels from modern painting, but been able to incorporate it within a tradition. Might not have a great answer for this, but I do wonder if that same method or mechanism for integration, if it was, like, properly delineated, could be used with music, for example. Because there seems to be a lot of different opinions, especially with Orthodox music, because I talk to a lot of Orthodox musicians, where if you're in Russia, you'll love the sound of Appalachian Orthodox chant and people trying to play around with, Appalachian tones and Appalachian sounding music because it's, like, particular to the Americas. You think it sounds
Mm-hmm.
great, but there's so many Americans who are Orthodox who are like, no, 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 we can't do any of that stuff. That's not true Orthodoxy. That's not
Yeah.
legitimate. And then there seems to be there is the tradition of the octoechos, but how the octoechos is harmonized has been completely different, like
Mm-hmm.
through different ways. And so it's like I almost kind of wonder if you could do the same thing in the musical realm, like take some of the innovations of the 20th century, and if there was a way to baptize them into liturgical music that was, appropriate. I don't know if you have any thoughts about that. That's
I think it'll happen
very music
eventually.
realm, but
I think it'll happen eventually. I think, for example, like what we do here, our monastery is indebted to the Jerusalem Greek liturgical tradition because the founder of our monastery uh, was Bishop Damaskinos of Jaffa in the Holy Land.
what
And
is your monastery again? I was going to ask you
the
that.
monastery of
Where?
St. Dionysius the Areopagite
Okay,
in
and
Long
where is
Island.
that?
Long Island
Oh,
in
okay.
St. James is the town in Long Island, like an hour and a half from New York City.
Okay.
And so therefore we have been basically doing a form of chanting that is based partly on Byzantine chant. But given that we do the services in English, by definition, you have to alter it a little bit in order to make it fit to the
Mhm.
English language. So that is, I think, a good example of how the practical necessity offers you a means by which how to creatively be innovative without doing it for its own sake, but nevertheless contributing to the enrichment of the tradition.
Hmm.
You see? And so if you ever come here, you will notice that it's slightly different. It's like it's the music is unique, but it works. You get the flavor that is Greek, but is done for an English speaking American audience, and it comes from the English speakers grappling with how to make that Byzantine tradition work to the needs of the English language. And
Sure.
so I think that's one answer to your question. The other answer is basically an issue, like, is twofold. One is the we don't do things purely for the sake of being innovative for its own sake. Like, that's the easiest answer that, like, you will normally get, which is true. But at the same time, you know, part of human nature is that you get bored with stuff. I mean, it's just, so people are going to be writing new things. Okay, so you have to write new things within the ethos of the tradition. But by definition, you have to do it in a way that is true to who you are for the needs of the community that you're dealing with. And so there's multiple points of reference that have to be somehow taken into consideration in making the choices. And the key is for it not to be disruptive to the liturgical experience, and for it to function as it should function, to elevate and focus the participants in a state of prayer that is not distracting, but also making sure that it becomes evidence of the life of the Holy Spirit in the church, that this is a living tradition, that is not just a regurgitation of things that have been done just because we want to enshrine things ad nauseum, because if we don't, somehow we feel like we're betraying the tradition. So the key is that there is no formula that will enable you to make the discerning choices. You have to discover it. And that's the beauty of it.
I think some of it is love.
Yeah.
You know, my friend Tom, who was Andrew's assistant, he said something to me. He said almost all artistic innovation for innovation's sake is bad. Like aesthetically, this is his opinion. He said if you really want to innovate, it's very simple. All you have to do is love two things really well, and you'll naturally innovate. I thought, wow, that's a great.
What are the two things?
So, like, for him, it would be like you love Japanese architecture and you love colonial architecture, and if you don't have to try to innovate, you're an architect and you love those two things.
Oh, I see what you mean.
You will naturally innovate.
Yeah.
And you'll be and it will be respectful, and it'll be hopefully cogent, you know. But it's like, don't try to innovate. Just love two different things super well.
Yeah, you have.
And so
it's a good way of putting it, because we become the synthesizing filter, so to speak. We assimilate, and then we embody what has taken place within us. But it has to be imprinted with that authenticity of love for, like, the respect and value that that the respect for the tradition, for that specific form that has made such an impact on you, and that you want to actually give it back as a gift that you enshrine as evidence of what we could accomplish, you know? And so if you have that attitude, definition, you're going to be producing stuff that is going to be rich, is going to be alive, is going to be. But if you have a blasé attitude about, like, I'm just doing this as just being clever, as just me, like, standing out as some kind of egotistical kind of, like, fit, because, I feel like if I don't do that, then I'm not going to get, like, the hits, in social media or like the popularity in the art world. It's just that it's just going to produce vacuous garbage. And so, but you have to be committed to a sense of tradition.
Right.
You have to be committed to a sense of tradition. So I would contend painters today is difficult. When I'm looking for painters to inspire me today, it's extremely difficult because most of them are doing exactly the opposite of what we're talking about.
They're just innovating for innovating.
They're trying to be clever in coming up with ways to game the system in order to then be acknowledged as the next thing that is, trendy. So, but the ones that are like actually like you respect as masters are people who have been working for like decades without getting known, as mainstream figures because they value their practice as a continuation of a specific tradition, even if it's a modernist tradition of painting. They've thought about what does painting mean? How can I maintain this paradigm that I value and make the best, articulations or like expressions of that tradition now? And so when you look at their work, it's like, yeah, that's the real thing. Yeah. And but it's not what's like in the trendy galleries in New York.
Right.
But it's nevertheless, it has a good audience. It's like people who value classical music. There is a very particular kind of audience for that. It requires a specific intellectual engagement with that kind of tradition that not a lot of people are willing to put into it, or they haven't been exposed to it. Okay, so
yeah, I think a lot of it. I mean, 60 years ago, I think it was when it was in the middle of the Cold War when Van Cliburn won the Tchaikovsky competition. He got a ticket tape parade in New York City.
Wow. That's amazing.
So it's like, yeah, I mean, for a piano competition.
Wow.
So there was a time when everyone just listened to classical music, and I'm like, that.
Yeah.
I wish we could,
But you know what? Now the audiences are smaller. But the exchange that happens is quality, dude. It's like, what do you want? Quantity or quality? And I'm not quoting who. Do you want the reign of quantity or you want quality? I mean, it's like.
But I almost feel like sometimes in order to have quality, you kind of need quantity. It's like if you want really good storytellers, you need a bunch of people telling stories. And in order to get really good classical music, you need a bunch of people doing and listening to classical music. And then the really good will come out,
Well, yes. I mean, yeah, I mean, it's just like, but you know how like this, I don't know if it's Sturgeon's law is like 95%, 99 or 95% of everything is crap, It's like, it's like there is that component too, but like, but in that sense, I understand what you mean. It's like, if you have a community that is actually aspiring towards a common goal of excellence, it inspires everybody into going for that, more and more. It you know what I'm saying? It fuels that.
We've lost that.
Yeah.
Now, this is super tangential, but talking about like the tradition and whatnot, the Coptic iconography, most of which was a little cartoonish. No offense to most of the Coptic iconographers. I'm actually about to talk to a guy, George McCary, who full-time Coptic iconographer, and his stuff to me looks great. So I'm like, hey, come on the channel, let's talk about it, because you can tell it's in the tradition, but it doesn't have the cartoonish look to it. But I was talking to him the other day in preparation for whenever we're gonna talk, like in a week or so, and he was saying how the Coptic iconography had to be totally revived because it had basically just fallen out.
Yeah.
And I know you and Jonathan talked about how iconography, even in the Orthodox tradition, it almost like went under. I mean, there was hardly anybody doing it for a while. If I know it's not your tradition and you're not in communion, but let's take, for example, like the Syriac Church, which effectively now has basically no iconographic
Right.
tradition, even though there is precedence historically for stuff that they did. You know, if you were tasked with reviving the Syriac tradition, or there were a group of interested artists who were Syriac and they wanted to revive the Syriac iconographic tradition, what would your advice be, or what would you do? Sorry if that's a crazy question, but
No, that's an interesting question. I mean, it does, um, because it relates to the, like you were saying about the Coptic revival. Um, I forgot the
yeah, and it has
name.
to do with tradition and
Right,
how to carry
right,
on tradition, and it's like in this case it's not the continuation, but it's like reviving a
right,
tradition, you
right,
know?
right, right. I see what you mean. Um, that's a very, I think by definition the you have to always, you're always looking back. There's no way that, like, you have to take the best of what your immediate, like, communities, like your community's tradition, like the like exemplary works of that tradition, and glean from it the principles that made that work masterful. And that could take centuries. That could take,
Hmm.
but you start by emulation, and you cannot escape that. And that's the one thing I think that sometimes I regret. Sometimes I talk to people about the need for not to be rigid about how you engage in the tradition, uh, um, and that is, the tradition is not just about, like, mechanistic slavish copying things, uh, but um, but I think, by definition you start with copying, and then in loving that tradition and emulating it, you begin to find your own voice in it, and then you become more comfortable in editing what it is that you take from this painter, you take from that painter, and then the synthesis begins to happen in a more organic way that is natural. You're not doing it in a way that is forced, as much as it becomes part of the natural process of clarifying the ideas that you're trying to convey in a specific piece. And
Hmm.
then the love that you put into it then becomes manifest as something that is in unique interpretation. But that takes a while for you to be able to reach that point. But it begins by respecting the masterpieces. There is a
Hmm.
canon of greatness in any tradition. Chinese painting, Western painting, tribal painting. It's like everybody knows that there is a lineage, and you have to respect the masters, man. And if you don't, then you're just gonna produce crap, and then you're just gonna be like, basically, I mean,
This, I think, is probably part of the problem in music. It's in the part of the problem with architecture. It's like I feel like Picasso could do the other,
yeah,
you know, and like probably, although I don't know because I'm not an architect, but like the initial brutalists could do a Greco-Roman building.
yeah,
But now you have all these architects who don't know anything whatsoever about how to build a classical building. They haven't been
yeah,
taught in it.
yeah,
And then I feel it's the same with like modern music. I mean, it's you know,
yeah. I think, yeah,
it's exactly the same. Whereas to me, the music that I love the most from the 20th century, even though I'm a big Messiaen fan, I like some of the experimentation done by like Penderecki and Perez. So I'm not totally anti-modern music, but to me, like in the 20th century, you also have the great Anglican choral tradition. You have Perry and Bainton and Howells and all of these people. They're also in the 20th century, but they were riding in a tradition that English, but influenced by Brahms,
I see.
influenced by counterpoint. Like it's a direct lineage. Whereas some of like the computer music that's being done in a lot of the conservatories right now, they don't know how to write a fugue.
I see.
Like even if they knew how to write a fugue because they had to do it for a test one time, they don't know how to write a fugue. They haven't mastered any of the art that has come before them of their trade, and then they're just innovating, and so it's crap.
Yeah, the part of the problem, I was talking to a painter, not a painter, a sculptor friend. He said that part of the problem with contemporary art is that they've taken the champion anti-retinal position, because
Anti what?
retinal, like Duchamp was like, painting is a retinal art. It's like about the eye, right? And so he wanted to underline how art is more than just about the retinal experience, that there is aspects of idea and the specific intent and choices that like the artist put into it that relates to the institution that eventually becomes accepted. So it's a complex process that goes beyond even the artist's statement of an intellectual posturing of like, I'm gonna take this, I'm gonna call it art, and it is art because I says so. So while he said yes, it is that, but it's also part of a mechanism that is beyond the control of the artist, that then makes it something that will either be accepted as art or not. And so he started this trajectory that went against the retinal, and has gotten to the point where it's like similar to what you described now, where it's just you're trying to come up with clever ways of making a statement, and you're forgetting about innate properties of the medium you work with and how these properties have an effect on either the viewer or the listener. And in that sense, I'm a modernist I'm saying that as a provocative thing, but not in a real sense of like negative sense of modernism, but in terms of there part of modernity in terms of painting consisted of trying to find out what makes painting what a painting is, and grappling with the making sure that you're creating quality work based on those innate properties of painting, whatever they are. Okay, there is a whole tradition of criticism that comes out of that project that became what was rejected in the 60s, which is the Greenbergian model. Greenberg proposed that painting is innately flat, and so therefore painting should cast out any illusionism and seek out to emphasize its innate flatness. And that's a very simplistic way of reducing his paradigm. But in any case, I think I lean towards the idea that painting is about a cognitive experience of like a visual thing by definition, and you are entering into the magic of form. and you are trying to conjure up aspects of the mystery of being as it could be interpreted through form, and you're presenting it to the viewer so they could enter into that mystery. And when they do, they feel that there is a connection to things that something sublime that extends beyond their particularity, their smallness. They're tapping into something great that ultimately is the channeling of us being created in the image and likeness of God, even if the painter is completely atheistic. You know? And so similarly with music, if there is no sense of the craft of like music as doing a specific thing that affects the soul of the listener, and you don't value it as a craft that actually brings out that magic, and you're just dealing with clever ideas, you're completely disregarding the nature of music. Although in me saying that, some people will be like, oh, but how could you define what? Because it touches on the problem of the postmodern like rejection of essentialism. You see? So while the modernists still function under the notion that we could reach an understanding of what the essence of a specific medium is, whether it's music, sculpture, painting, whatever, it like by the 60s, the whole notion of the essential properties of mediums was thrown out the window. Installation became a prime example of that rejection of specificity of medium specificity. See, medium specificity was a modernist, paradigm, aspect of the modernist paradigm. That is thrown out the window.
Postmoderns reject that.
Because you can't be essentialist. You cannot tell me what it means to really be a man. You cannot tell me what it really means to be a woman. Oh, that is like an imposition. That's an imposition of a meta narrative. Oh, it's all about fluidity and So you see what I'm saying? And so the question, the ontological question of what is a painting? What is music? What is so on and so forth? What is a sculpture? It's basically not relevant as part of the paradigm right now. Although it is as a subtext insofar as you are trying to not fall into the limited interpretations of the medium. And you're keeping it as all right, I don't want to fall into that trap, so let me keep it at bay. So anything that I do has to be a rejection of that kind of paradigm. But so I would say is that either extreme is a problem. Okay? I'm definitely not subscribing to the anti-essentialism of postmodernism, but it's problematic also to give into an extreme reductivism that then ultimately is an end game that you cannot then escape, because you reduce a medium to its almost like a reduction that is absurdum, a reduction absurdum that you ultimately can't do anything with it anymore, because you've constrained yourself to abiding to this quote teleological conclusion to the paradigm that if you don't live up to it, then you're not in the stage of progress of that medium as you should. And that's exactly what I'm not into when it comes to modernism. So you see, you have to keep those extremes, just respect for, for the specific tradition that you're working within. Accept that there is more of an open-endedness to it than the modernists would claim there was, but an open-endedness that is not as extreme and dispersive or as disintegrative as a postmodernist tendency.
I mean, the good thing about postmodernism is in its ultimate rejection of meta-narratives. Now you can just kind of recapitulate any meta-narrative that you want, and you can do whatever.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah.
So it kind of opens up a space. If there are no rules, then, well, let's go do the traditional thing then,
Yeah, but they use it. They use it without a belief in the content presupposed by that form. So if they do expressionist painting, they're not necessarily believing that like the psychological assumptions that a German expressionist had when they first did expressionism. It's
Okay.
divorced. Is divorced from that, so it becomes a
Well,
vacuous
I mean
sign of
more so.
expression,
Yeah, that
not
makes sense.
genuine expressionism.
I mean more so just because that's the flavor of the day. That's the
Right.
zeitgeist. And because of its inconsistencies, it's kind of opened up the landscape. It's like how you get Arvo Pärt. Like postmodernism sort of allows an Arvo
I
Pärt
see
to
what you mean.
exist.
Yeah. I see what you mean.
You
Yeah.
know, even though like he's not a postmodern,
Yeah. Yeah.
like I wouldn't classify him as postmodern composition, but it's sort of like that landscape of they've broken down all the rules that allows someone super traditional like
Yes.
Pärt to be able to, you know, to come out.
Yeah.
Can I ask one other conceptual thing?
Mhm.
I was trying to this is I know you're not a big fan of Krug, but in my trying to understand Krug, I was talking to Andrew,
Mhm.
and he was, you know, his conception of it, if I'm remembering it correctly, is that there's color, there's line, and there's form. And like in a Da Vinci, for example, it's all form and a little bit of line, but the color doesn't really matter. Because you could just you could take whatever colors Da Vinci had and you could put in other colors and it wouldn't really change the composition of the
Right.
painting.
He's more about form in the sfumato. Yeah. So yeah.
But then when you get to like Krug, it's all line and color. And it's like not form almost at all. So is that, you know, is that a helpful, like how much do you think of art in that way of being on this like 3-part continuum of it's more line and form and not color, it's more color and form and not line, it's more,
I think
I
of
mean, is that a good conceptual framework to
yeah.
sort of
That's
understand people like?
yeah. That's one way of looking at it. I mean, some art historians have used different models to deal with different moments. You know, like there's a class, like you have
And then just so you know,
classical.
the follow up is then like what would you be like? How
Right,
would you
right,
classify your own iconography within that
right,
framework?
right. They have the classical model, like the painterly model, you know, like linear models,
Mm-hmm.
you know, stuff like that. Um, so it's along those lines. But you know, it's funny. I think of myself as a Florentine in my in
Yeah.
my in my in my use and appreciation of diseño. Diseño is the Italian term for uh, drawing, but it is conceptually more expansive. It basically has to do with uh, the conception of the design of anything that you depict. And so the Vasari was one of the first who articulated the conception of diseño. It was a Florentine
Okay.
tradition that he saw being best exemplified by the combination of was Michelangelo. And the idea is that you start everything with drawing, and
Mm.
you conceptualize the painting around the drawing. And there was a battle between the colorists and the uh, designers, so to speak, those who were advancing diseño. The Florentines were the diseño people, and then the Venetians were the colorists. And the colorist tradition was you block in the painting through patches of color, and you arrive at the composition through the conceptualization of patches of color fields, so to speak. And so that's why Tintoretto and Titian and people like that, their form, it's more like soft, whereas you have like, you know, Bronzino is an extreme example of like a Florentine tradition draftsman, because he's like everything has to be subject to the scrutiny of line. And so
Mm.
you know, I I like the idea that was developed by Sukari, I think his name was, but I might be wrong the way that I'm pronouncing it. He was, I think, one of the founders, if not the founder, of the St. Luke's Academy. And I don't know if it was in Rome or Florence, but in any case, and it was predicated on the notion of diseño. So he had this conception of diseño externo and diseño interno. The diseño externo is the drawing that is manifest on the paper or surface.
Mm-hmm.
The diseño interno is the mental conception from which the diseño externo comes out of.
Okay.
So it's very Aristotelian insofar as, it goes according to the four causes.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And so I like the idea because it is intellectual. It is the notion that you have a clarity of thought that you are then manifesting. And it will be best manifesting according to the clarity that you have in the conception. However, it is dangerous insofar as it could be too Platonizing in its intellectualism. Because I prefer to look at the diseño interno and this diseño externo as always playing off of each other. The diseño interno is never fully conceptualized. It is more or less clear. It becomes completely clarified according to the line that becomes manifest in reality. So there is always a give and take between the diseño interno and the diseño externo. Because of the fact that we are corporeal beings, it always will take that dance for something to be clearly, embodied. It has to basically be a play of how you clarify or correct your initial intent based on how it looks according to the eye and how it is embodied in a concrete drawing. So I'm all about line, man.
That's great. That's great. Yeah.
But as you know, as you know, it's not divorced from color.
Right.
I mean, the color is life. It's drawing is structure, the bones. The color is the flesh, and so you give a painting life, color. And I'm thinking primarily, in terms of a representational painting. As much as we like to say that icon painting is more in the realm of the abstract, is actually is representational. And by the way, the Byzantines never talked about icon painting as being abstract. They always talked about it according to the Greco-Roman understanding of mimesis. So an icon is a representation, is a likeness of a prototype. That's basically their definition of an icon. They were never fixated on style. That's the 20th century thing.
There's some anachronisms of the way people interpret.
Yeah, totally.
Ancient art.
Yeah, and that's that has to be, and that's the frustrating thing about talking about iconography nowadays, because a lot of people take for granted a lot of the interpretations that they've adopted from their catechism, coming from the Parisian school or Canteglou, and they take that for granted as somehow the theology of the icon as it was articulated by the fathers, in the 9th, 8th century. It's like, no, I mean, that's a very, very 20th century way of talking about icon painting.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean that we can't use them, but we have to acknowledge that we're, in that sense, being very modern. And we have to acknowledge that we're indebted to modernism, and we should be grateful that through the grace of God, providentially, he arranged it so that, modernism contributed to creating a cultural environment that enabled us to speak about the icon according to a different aesthetic paradigm that enabled it to revive.
That's very interesting.
So
yeah. Well, I know you got to go in just a couple minutes, but before you go, can I ask, because you mentioned that Andrew Gould is doing the your father's church down in Puerto Rico.
Yeah.
How is that going, and what's
tell you the truth, I think today he sent my dad the final drawings. I think I haven't gotten to see them yet. Yeah, but basically, what we decided to do was my dad ran into some problems with the engineering. He had initial drawings drafted based on a Russian style church that he saw in Jordanville in the cemetery over there. And he liked that structure. It's a small chapel they have at the cemetery. And so he wanted to emulate that building. So he had an architect draft some drawings that looked like that. But when the time came,
this is your dad or Andrew?
My dad. So when the time came, because my dad went with my brother to take pictures of that place, and then so my dad submitted all the information to an architect that he hired to do the drawings. But the problem was that given that he wasn't a liturgical architect, he started having problems with the engineering. And so at that point, my dad contacted me and he asked me for some advice, right? And I'm like, I know who I could ask. And so then I asked Andrew. And part of the reason why I asked Andrew to contribute to this was because of his sense of contextuality, of like how, you want to, while working within the tradition, also communicate to the locals that what they are being introduced to is not something that is completely foreign to them, that it is an invitation for them to become part of, and that their unique cultural setting is not to be seen as at odds with orthodoxy per se. And so anyway, so I knew Andrew had that sensibility, and so I invited him to come to Puerto Rico, and he agreed, and my dad agreed, and he went there with Julie and the kids, and he met with the engineer, and while he was there, I think, tell you the truth, he came to give advice, tell you the truth, to fix the engineering problem. And while he was there, we decided that we wanted him to redo the drawings.
Nice.
So that gave us an opportunity also to take him to a local church that is, I think, one of the oldest churches, colonial churches in the Caribbean, in the center of Saint Germain, where my family is, where the mission is. That's where I was born and where my dad grew up as a kid. And so they have this chapel there. It's a beautiful, it has all the elements that Andrew loves, like the organic, like materials and everything. And so he went to check it out. And so he decided to combine aspects of that colonial structure, that local colonial structure, which is, it's pretty much based on a basilica long, building. So while it is colonial, nevertheless, it harkens back to the united, East and West, like use of the basilica structure, and a combination of that and the Russian basic cubic form. So he combined the two, and he gave it the facade based on the colonial precedents that you see locally. And so
Nice.
it's a nice synthesis of the two. Yeah. So anyway, so that's
Yeah,
a
hopefully
beautiful,
it gets built.
and you know the thing
I'd
is,
love to.
this, sorry man, I keep on interrupting. The thing is that I don't want to miss this. It serves evangelizing as an evangelizing tool, because it's not like we're imposing a Russian structure in the Caribbean. It's like, no,
Right.
It's like, yes, we're part of the Russian Church, we're part of World War, and so we have our own architectural tradition, and that's being acknowledged. But we're also acknowledging that, like, you know, Orthodoxy is there to assimilate the good aspects of the local tradition, and it's not there to push those aspects out. And so in that sense, it's an invitation for people not to feel like, you know, they would have to become Russian if they become Orthodox. No, they become Orthodox, you know? And yes, they respect aspects of the Russian tradition, because that's what our administrative, our bishop is from the Russian tradition, but nevertheless, is not stamping out the uniqueness of the Puerto Rican people. So anyway, so that's sorry to interrupt.
That's awesome. No, I was just saying, I hope to come see it one day.
Yeah, definitely, man.
I hope it.
When we inaugurate it,
I'm excited about seeing it.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It'll be a pleasure, man.
That'll be awesome.